Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to take a look at what I'd call situational awareness, uh, sort of techniques you can use to stay on top of everything that's going on inside your live stream or production. And we're going to be using vMix for this and combining that with virtual stream decks, as well as a pretty cool piece of gear called the Corsair Xeneon Edge, which is a small, wide panel display that you can sit on a desk or even mount to a quarter 20 mount to provide feedback and information. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, starting from the basics and going up to more complex ways to do that. So to get started, let me let me begin here. If we have any comments or questions, please you can just put them in the comments below. And also, if you'd like to join us live on air, you can do that just through this link here on the screen. It's also in the show notes, so you should be able to join us. Somebody from the studio can get you on with me. So let me get started here. The place I really want to begin is talking a bit about what we're trying to accomplish here. So, one of the key things that I think a lot of people inside of the streaming world have dealt with at one point or another is getting comments coming back to you that your stream froze or they can't hear your audio or other things like that, where the audience ends up being the one telling you that something isn't right. And while it's not possible to capture all of these things, there are a whole set of key things that I think are important that you be aware of without any sort of external feedback coming to you. And a lot of these are things that the audience wouldn't even recognize, like, I'm not actually recording and I need to record. So, the ability to know that. Uh, but there are things that are like, is fade to black on? Is my audio muted? Is the stream on? Is the record on? Those types of things. Those are critical things to a production. So having a quick way to know, not just that you turn them on at the beginning, but if something went wrong or somebody, fat fingered pressed the wrong button to, deal with that. So this is sort of the place to start. That's the first element that we're trying to capture here. But the second is also general state awareness, where, the example we're going to use here is I can tell if remote guests are muted or unmuted if I needed to make changes. But I could also do more complex things like, are all my remote guests that I need for this panel live and on air? And as opposed to having to see that over like four or five or eight, potential indicators, how could you roll that together to a single indicator that says the cumulative state of what I need to do this next thing is good and I can move ahead? So we're going to cover these as sort of multiple different paths to this. Now, let me see. I apologize that I didn't bring up my comments here before. So let me just try to do that now. See if I got it here. Yeah, here we go. So, sorry about that. So let's jump in. So, William, thank you. I appreciate you joining us for the show. And you the man. Always good to see you here. Thank you for joining. Okay, so let's sort of bounce over to the first piece, which will be one of the key things that allows us to do this is the Stream Deck. And a very cool capability that was introduced in the latest version of the Stream Deck software is something called virtual Stream Decks. So, a virtual Stream Deck, effectively, if you remember, you have like all the Stream Decks that are physically attached, and you see these as physical devices. But you also now have the ability to add a virtual device. And this is basically any type of Stream Deck that you want. So I'll give you an example here. I'll just add another Stream Deck device. And you can see now, this is sort of it popped up here on the screen. And I have this set up as a 3x3. I can go in here though and change a 3x2. I could go in here and say, gee, I'd really like this to be, a 7x8 grid. And now I have this virtual stream deck that's sitting over here with 7 across by 8 down. And this gives me a lot of flexibility. First, because I'm not limited to the specific size of a stream deck I may have. If I have like a 15 button stream deck or even smaller, I still can leverage all of these additional virtual stream deck keys. So that's the first thing. The other thing, though, is that I can have multiple virtual stream decks active on the screen at the same time. So I can start to move these around to sort of put them into specific locations on the screen where they'd be most useful. I can lock them to those locations so I don't have a chance of sort of moving them by accident. And all of these buttons then become additional buttons that are available to me. So the other thing you can do with virtual stream decks is you just hide them too. So if I don't want to see it on screen, I can just click and hide it. So this lets me set up multiple virtual stream decks. And the way we're going to be leveraging this for this show is I have a Corsair Xeneon Edge that's sitting over here on the side of my desk. So you can see you said I got the light grid and everything else. But what I have here are 2 virtual stream decks. This across the top is my first virtual stream deck, which is what I mentioned, sort of all the key critical things: is my record on, is my stream on, audio mute, fade to black, all those things. And below that is the second one that I have. And these are stateful things. And this is what I talked about when I mentioned audio for panelists. And is everybody on? Is like my panel ready to go? So these are the sorts of things we'll cover. But the great thing about the Xeneon here is that not only are these visible, they're touchable too. So now I can go and have it do things just like a regular stream deck. And it has that control, but it also has the feedback. So just like a stream deck, all these elements are here. And having this in a touch display gives me a sort of great combined way to manage and to be aware of the state of everything that's going on. So the way we do the state control is through something in vMix. So let me get out of here and switch over to vMix over here that are called activators. And an activator in vMix is really just a way of saying, I want to map a state of something inside of vMix to a specific key or button or light on a physical hardware device. And so since this is a stream deck, physical, or virtual with virtual stream decks. So if I come here, I go up to settings, and then I click down here, you'll see we have shortcuts, and then we have activators. And that's what we're going to be focusing on for the first part of this. So inside of the activators tab, I can basically go and create a whole set of visual cues that I want to use. And it usually starts by, so if you look here, I'm saying, here's my default and the recording default and streaming. So all I'm saying when I do this is I take a Stream Deck button. And if I wanted to add, so we'll sort of go through, say, if I wanted to add a new indicator, what I would do is I'd go in here and I'd say, what type of device am I going to use? And so in this case, I'd say, I'm going to use a Stream Deck. And from there, I can say, let me find a button on that. And just, it works just like a Stream Deck. You can press on, press off, all those things are there. So if I'll just do this for the sake here. And then I can say, what event, what state am I interested in capturing? And I can say, this is just the default state. I have nothing else I want to do here. This is just when the button comes up. I can set that. And then I can go and say, what color do I want to make that button? And these are all the different sort of color palettes I have. So I can use colors as state indicators on buttons. when I set up an activator like this has no impact at all on the functionality when I push it. This is simply saying, as an activator, vMix looks at its internal state, and if a state is mentioned in the activator list, it goes and says, what color should I turn that button when this state is active? And if we sort of, let me get out of here, there are a lot of states. The default is sort of, this will be if nothing is going on, this is just the color of the button. But you can turn around and say, what's the input in a specific mix? What's the inputs in preview for the mixes? What are, audio settings and what are mute settings and bus audio routes? And there's just a whole set of particular indicators, states that you can track here. And so all you're doing, if you wanted to do things like, I want to capture record and I want to capture, is the stream on, or things like that, is I have these all set up with a default state. And in this case, that default state is red. And the reason is, if it isn't on, I want the indicator to turn red. So if I'm looking over there at the side panel with the Xeneon, if I see red, I know something is going on that shouldn't be. So that gives you that sort of easy heads up. But then I turn them green if the recording state is on, or if the streaming state, master audio, and fade to black is off. So I sort of do that the reverse. If fade to black is off, then it's green. If fade to black is on, then it's red. So you flip that one around because it's a negative state that I want to capture. But if I actually go over here, and so if we switch over to the view of the Xeneon over here, I can show you now, if I were to go and just put on fade to black, you can see now that fade to black just went red on me. Or if I were to mute the host audio. So these are things now that just sort of out the corner of your eye, a quick glance, I can tell if things are correct or not. And so if you were to start a show and you look over there before you click on stream and something's red, okay, I need to stop for a second and fix it. So it gives you that immediate situational awareness, which I think is really critical for a lot of live streaming, especially if you're a solo or small crude production, because there's a lot going on and there's a lot that you're responsible for. So the more you can push from, did I do everything in my checklist that I'm trying to remember, to just looking and going, I've sort of pre-programmed what things should look like before I start. And if something isn't there, then I know, okay, I can go and handle that before I go live. So just a good way to think of a use case for this. And this is something that is baked directly into vMix. These activators, they work with Stream Decks, they work with other things, but I thought this was a great, the combination of the virtual side where I can create all different sized sort of Stream Deck button layouts, and to have them on a screen that's very much like a simple console notification heads up display that is ideal for this. So we've done that for the critical things. But one of the things that I added to this was I have one button that sort of sits beside everything, and it's hard to see, but it's a reassert live button. And so this is something else that you could do where if it's before you start streaming, I would recommend that you go in and sort of debug this directly. Say, why is it just off, or is there something else going on? If you're in the middle of a production, going back and having something which says, I will proactively redefine the state I think I should be in for this. So I'll put on recording, I'll put on streaming, I'll put on, everything with master audio and make sure fade to black is off. If I came back and said, I do all those things as asserted states, that could be a quick panic fix in the middle of a production. But it really shouldn't be the first reaction. You're basically weighing future risk. Like if I didn't fix a problem and it's just going to go wrong in 20 seconds, it's not helpful. So you're weighing that against the need to get up and be live, being muted, have a stream interrupted. Those are sort of critical things. So it is acceptable to try to do that sort of, I don't know what's wrong, but I'm just going to do a quick fix. That's okay. But it definitely isn't something that you should use as your start point. If you're getting ready to go live, make sure you understand it's just that somebody didn't press a button or that somebody shut something off by accident versus I'm running out of resources, records going off because it failed writing to a drive or something like that. These types of things. So you want to understand those things, as soon as you can, but it's useful to have inside a live environment. So that is really cool. And we've done that for other things. So, like I have for all the remote guests, if they're muted or unmuted. So, if I come back here and sort of I have my remote guest here, you can see if I start clicking these off, I'm all of the buttons then went from blue to gray. And that's another distinction I want to make as we're talking here. For the critical things, the things that are the show isn't working. I have those as red and green, where red means something's wrong and green means things look like they're working. For stateful things, I go between gray and blue because that gives me a space where it isn't necessarily critical. There may be a reason somebody's audio was muted. So it doesn't mean like there's a failure. It could be the guest is having problems and they're trying to resolve them before they bring them on. So it would be okay that they're muted, but just having those there as indicators is still good. But this separates critical indicators from stateful indicators. My ability to think through and say, okay, this is what's happening versus, oh, I got a problem. So those are, some of the things that we have that can, separate how we set things up. And the other thing, if you'll notice, is that all of those buttons there, as soon as I pressed them, the state changed and that state got reflected in the color of the button. And that's the other thing to think about with this, as opposed to just sort of a press and pray. I push the button and I hope it's working. Having this type of feedback on a lot of buttons that are doing something dynamic to the production is really, really helpful because now I know I didn't sort of miss the button or I didn't press a different button. I know that not only did I press the button, but the state of the object changed in vMix and it positively asserted that change back through the activator. So, another element in this to consider. So, that's really cool. But what if we have something where we don't have a easy way to capture it in an activator? It isn't really even a vMix state. So let me give you an example because this is something that we've worked with before. So I'm going to be using in this production as an example live to air, and in live to air, I can have multiple guests that are going to be part of a production. It can take time from when a guest is sort of joins to when they're actually ready to go live on air. So, one of the things that I want to be able to do here is first to know which guests are actually already on air. So, if I look down, I have the ability to look at that. Uh, and so, right now, none of them are. But if I come back and say, I'm just going to turn the first guest on air, you can now see that when I click that guest on air, I have a blue light shining over here in the interface that says guest one is on air. But that isn't the necessarily visually the easiest, but it is also something that isn't inside of vMix. So how do we get this to work? So this is where working with activators becomes a little bit of a puzzle that you have to solve. How do I convert something stateful going on in my production with something that an activator can recognize? So the way I did this with just saying, how do I know whether a guest is on or off air? Is that we have scripting going on here. And in the script, I'm actually reading XML from live to air, looking at the state of the guest in each one of the channels. And if that channel state changes, I then go and take an action in vMix, which is recognizable for the activator system. And for this case, what I'm doing is each one of my guests comes into a mix input. So let me switch over to vMix for a second. I can show you exactly what I'm doing here. So the guests directly from live to air are coming into uh, these slots, which are called REM 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's remote 1, remote 2, 3, and 4. But the way I'm compositing everything up in my multi-box, which would be sort of the panel that I'd want to bring live when all my guests are ready, I am using mixes for this. So I set up all these different mixes that I have here inside for mix one, well, actually mix 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are for the REM 1. But the mix, I now have two different a preview and a program state inside each mix. And so what I'm using to do this inside of the scripting in vMix is I'm reading the state inside of live to air through the XML. And based on that state, I'm either assigning the off air indicator, my off air stub, or I'm assigning the REM to the mix. And I can do that dynamically. It's just a standard shortcut in vMix. But the activators allow me to track what's the state of program and preview inside a mix. So by sort of doing that level of indirection here, I am now able to go and say, all right, I can trigger an activator for something totally distinct from uh, vMix, but force that discovered state into something that vMix can recognize, which in this case is the program or preview state of a mix bus. So let me go in and talk a little bit about how we do that here in the scripting. So I'll sort of slide down. So there's a lot here, and I don't want to. This is a slightly more complicated script, and we will have this up so you can take and use it and modify it to whatever you would need. But at the top, we do a whole lot of things. And in this case, we start out by saying, how many guests am I going to need? What's my maximum remote guest count here? And that's going to be, 4, because we say now panel will have 4. And where is live to air going to publish the XML it needs? And then, everything else we're doing is sort of standard XML work. We're sort of saying, create a document that will hold this XML so we can manipulate it in code. And then we're just finding different, again, this is a lot of prep work that we have in here. But the real heart of this comes down to we are pulling everything we want from the from the live to air XML to a web client, adding it as a string and using that, that will be the raw XML string that we take from live to air, and then we're converting that into a node. So this is all the stuff. We don't have to really dive into any of it, but that's all the preliminary stuff. But what we're doing effectively is, let me sort of come down here. It's a lot of prep work up front, is we have a loop that's going to be running in the background full time with vMix. And the first thing we will do in that loop is we'll turn around and say, okay, let's load the current state of live to air. So we're downloading through web client the XML as a string into a variable. And we are then loading that XML into LTA XML, which is actually an XML structure that I can manipulate using all the tools. And for these types of things, especially when you're dealing with external elements, we do this in a try catch. This means that try this, but if something goes wrong, catch it as an exception over here and, write out a message or decide what you want to do. Just keep looping until live to air comes up or whatever. But so this is sort of the first step for working with something external. You read it and bring it into XML and make sure you were able to do that successfully. And then you go on. And now we're loading the vMix XML, which is something we've done many times in the past. And one of the things, and so we'll sort of combine a couple of things as we go through the code, but we're turning around and saying, I need all 4 guests to be active and on air before I turn around and say it's okay to bring on the panel. So we're just basically saying how many guests at this point do I know are live and on air? But then what we're doing is we're iterating through the first four channels of live to air to get the guest states. And again, because this is external, we're doing the try catch logic, but we're pulling this out and saying, uh, is basically, is we're asking, get this guest if they're on air. Are they on air? And if they are, then you sort of find the corresponding mix inside of vMix, and we will go and say, okay, we now know the state of the input node, and from there, we're just going to go and uh, we're selecting the vMix node, so we actually have all the information about the mix node that we're working with. And then I'm just going to like pull out details about that. So we need the input number that's associated with this, the preview input number, and the active input number. So these are all the different elements that we need to sort of figure out what is going on with state. And then we're just handling, if the channel is off air and live to air, then we're basically, that means there was nothing. There is no channel here. It came back and sort of said, there's no on air state node that we can pull for channel one. So it's coming back and it's saying, okay, so you just, just set it as, the placeholder for it as active, which is the off air indicator, as rem and preview and do nothing. So, because it already shows it. So we're sort of sitting there going, okay, it starts out at defaulting to it's off air, so we don't have to do anything. That way you're not asserting something constantly inside vMix. And if it isn't, if for some reason we're off air, we're just asserting it as, okay, let's assert it to the off air state. And that's what we're doing. We're setting preview to the rem for it, and the active input is actually the placeholder off air indicator. And because I mentioned the activators now are based on what we're doing right here. If until the program inside the given mix is set to the correct rem, it turns back and says, nope. So once it's set to the correct rem, the activator is triggered and it turns blue. Otherwise, it stays the default gray. And the other way is we actually turn around and say, okay, we found a valid on-air guest in the first four channels. So we increment the valid guest by one. And now we're going and saying, we're forcing it to the on-air state. So this is putting the off-air placeholder into preview and the current rem for this channel into program, and that will trigger the activator and set it blue. But here is the cool part. So this is giving you basically, and you don't have to worry about the details of this so much as the logic behind it. We're checking state, and then we're using something inside of vMix to trigger the activator to reflect whether the state is sort of on or off, ready or not, those types of things. What really is the cool capability once you get your head around, that I can track external state and bring it into vMix, is the fact that I'm counting up these guests, how many guests are on air, and I'm looking for it to be 4. What I can then do is I can actually take and say, what other thing inside of vMix can I use as an activator? And one of the things you can use as an activator inside of vMix is dynamic inputs. And so in order to know the individuals, I did that through like individual channels are on. I did that through the mixes. But if I wanted to know, are all of the guest channels that I need for this panel live and ready, and compact that into a single button that can show on screen, I can then work through and say, I'm counting this up. And so when I know that I have 4 guests, if all the REM channels are on, I can set the dynamic input to a specific input. So like REM 4. And then one of the activators inside of vMix is what value is inside a dynamic input. So by doing this now, I am taking something that is a composited state, forcing it into something that I can use inside vMix, in this case, a dynamic input one, setting that to a specific value, and then setting in the activators a trigger that will go and set a button to a specific color when dynamic input value is set to something specific. So this means now not only do I have the ability to look at things inside of vMix and also things individually outside of vMix by controlling simple things, but I can do computed state where I'm looking at a whole set of things. So if I wanted for this to come back and say, not only do all these guests have to be on air, but I also need to know that each one has their audio unmuted and that my host has the audio unmuted. And only then will I show that I'm ready to go on air. I can do these types of things now. And I think as you look at these types of situations, these are really cool triggers you can use to get yourself aware of macro states, things that all have to be satisfied before you can bring that stage in your production live. And that's really, if you think of a lot of productions, what they really are sets of discrete uh, states that all have to be met to show what I want to show. So, when it's a host on, there's going to be things where they can turn around and say, well, I need the host video, I need the mic, I need certain other things set. So that's one sort of state for that segment. But for a panel, there are a lot of things that all have to be set, and you can now track all of those. So I may not need to set all of the things uh, for my buttons here. I could simply go back and say, all I want to see, I don't care individually whether anyone's on or off. I just want to know, are they all on and ready to go? And then maybe as a host, I could be the one that triggers moving to a panel and moving out. But I don't have to know all the details because I may have a producer going and handling my remotes. And this is just, I get a signal, you can go anytime you're ready, and then I could press a button. So it's got a lot of use cases, not just for finding faults, but for creating that awareness that you need to move into a segment to say, I'm ready to go. I have somebody on air. I have the asset ready and it's up in, my a multi-box shot that I'm ready to go with. You can do all these things. And that's really the critical piece here. Like I said, and I'm going to post the script, but it's less about the details of the script, especially if you're not using live to air for these things, but it's about the concepts of how you could use this script as a template to capture other things that you may want to capture statefully inside your own productions. So that's everything that I really wanted to cover here. Uh, I think there's a lot of cool things that have happened with the Stream Deck, and virtual Stream Decks are definitely one of them. Uh, we've done a show before on them, sort of layering them into your vMix interface, but this is a more, compelling use case where this is something that creates a new sort of station, a new visibility focus. And even though I'm using the Xeneon Edge here, this would work on any other monitor. So if you had another monitor, you need to set that up. I mean, the Xeneon Edge is just great because it's touch and interactive. So it's like having a true virtual Stream Deck in a lot of ways, the footprint and the touch capability, as well as the display. But, there's more I'm going to talk about in the post show about this. But, I think this is something that you could apply in a lot of different scenarios, even with an old junky monitor that you put on the side to say, I'm going to add that and use that now as my heads up. That could be very useful. So before I go, I see we had one other comment, which was Stephen from Rwanda. Stephen, thank you very much for joining. Definitely appreciate this. So why don't we wrap this up for today's show here, and we will, probably have another show in about 3 weeks, and we can dive into hopefully another interesting topic then. So if you can hang out, though, we will have a post show after here where I will talk about a few more things that could be interesting around setting up situational awareness that go beyond the Stream Deck, and we'll we'll discuss that then. But if you can't join, thank you very much. If you can, I'll see you in a moment. Take care. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the post show here, and thank you. I really appreciate everyone making the time to join here. Uh, a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. Uh, One of the things that we covered in this show was around statefulness inside of vMix, and that's a critical element. But a very cool feature of the Xeneon Edge is comes in the form of software that Corsair releases called ICUE software. And in that software, you can either have the Xeneon Edge be a monitor, or it can host widgets. And the cool thing about these widgets is that they can actually track things like internal system temperatures and loads and other things going on inside your system. So if you had this, but you wanted to use the widgets, you can't really use you can, but it's not, it doesn't mesh very well. You can't really use the virtual stream decks on top of the widgets at the same time. It's easy for them to get out of sync and sort of pop behind the widgets and things like that. But what you get then, if you put the virtual stream deck on another monitor and put the widgets on the Xeneon, you now get not just stateful awareness. I know that, the core things are up and that these are the specific states in my system that need to be met for each segment of the show I want to run, but I also get physical indicators. And anybody who's run live productions has dealt with things like thermal issues or things where the system is getting overloaded. Maybe a fan died and the system's starting to heat up, things of that sort. Having that sort of visual cockpit about physical, thermal type things going on, capacity things inside your system can be incredibly valuable and a way to stop a problem before it happens. I mean, if somebody's looking and they see the temperature is going up or the temperature is very high, or my CPU seems to be throttling, or my GPU, these types of things caught early can be exceptionally useful to avoiding sort of a catastrophic failure. And some of these things could be, I know that I have to, until I understand what's going on, back down the load. So you could come back and say, there were certain things in the show that I'll change around and not sort of try to pull in this many feeds simultaneously, or to, do these types of automations that I may have wanted to do. And I'll try to simplify things until I understand what's going on, or maybe go to a backup system or something else that you may have in place. So having that heads up before the system is like, gee, our stream is just stuttering and cutting in and out, and we're having incredibly low frame rates or things like that. If you could turn around and say something's not right with this system, and then deal with that in a more measured way, as opposed to, my God, my stream is crashing. These types of things are, again, very, very useful. So combining a regular monitor with the Xeneon could be a huge uh, game changer in terms of your ability to manage a complex environment and all the things that can go on with that. So that was really the main stuff. The Xeneon is great in terms of just having that extra small monitor there. And let me actually see if I can just give you a little picture, which is little bit better. Let me switch over here. So the Xenon monitor is actually a couple of different parts that sort of come together. It comes with the main frame of it. So I have that as an output here on vMix. I don't know if I can pull that in or not, but so yeah, that's okay. So I mean, this as a device, it has the screen here, and sort of behind the screen, it's hard to see, is a stand, and you have two cables that are sort of back there behind it. Yep. So that's a better shot. So you have a couple of cables that sit behind it, and if you have a more modern system, you can go with a single like USB-C cable to a Thunderbolt port. That can handle. I think it may be USB C 3.2 or something, where it can handle that as a video out display, and it will do it all in one. But that will give you your touch. That will give you your video. If not, you have to have a USB-C cable hooked up to a traditional USB port, and then a HDMI cable, which will control what's on the display. But it's a very simple device. It really is just a touch monitor that you have here. But because of the footprint, uh, I mean, this is like I don't know exactly. It's like 2160 by 720, so it's almost like a double wide monitor, sort of sitting here, very small. Uh, that gives you flexibility. It also is uh, aware of the orientation. So it has sort of a dynamic in it where if I turned it sideways and mounted it on, a quarter 20 peg on a pole in my studio, you can have things that will queue up, in the horizontal, portrait mode versus landscape mode. Uh, and that will give you, other ways that you can mount this, use this, and create that sort of awareness space that you need. Or just use it as a monitor for things like comments or other stuff. It could be useful that way. So that's really it. I don't have a lot more specifically to talk about here, but if you had any questions, please feel free, leave them in the comments. You can even leave them in the comments after the show, and I will be happy to respond to everything. And it is something I think that could make a big difference for your productions. So, as I said, we will be doing a show in about 3 weeks. So I appreciate everybody for hanging around for this. And I will see you all in 3 weeks. Be well. Take care.